quite a few points of entry really for me. I think it was a sort of convergence of elements really. But what really triggered me was even though I had an idea, a character like one of the characters in the book in my head for a very long time, many years, I never thought of doing anything with that particular character until I saw a world roundup of crime fiction, and they mentioned literally every possible country you can think about, even Iceland, but and of course Cuba, and Martinique, I think it was one of the French, Cuba, Spanish-speaking Caribbean. Um, Martinique or Guadeloupe, I think it's French-speaking Caribbean. Each one had a writer, and there was no one that I knew of at the time who was writing crime fiction, coming from that cultural, geographical space. And I thought it odd for a number of reasons, not least because crime is such an important factor, and a sociological factor, and so much of a fact in Caribbean societies. You know, we know that other writers like Marlon James have treated crime differently. So it's almost as though it's a kind of natural ground, if you like, natural basis for writing crime fiction. Nobody did it, so I thought I would do it. Later on, I learned that there were other writers who had attempted or who were doing. There was a woman who I met 2 years ago who told me she was writing crime fiction, but I hadn't heard of her then. But I really wanted to adopt the genre and do something very Caribbean with it. And I discovered in the process of writing how useful that particular genre can be. And in a way, I learned to respect the genre a lot more because it really works best in exploring, in showing up the underbelly of the, societies in which we live. That there is something quite visceral about it, because it's about murder. It's about it's about serious stuff. It's about morbid stuff sometimes, and it's a fantastic medium for presenting society with the ugly aspects of itself. And that's one of the reasons why I really got into it. That's how I got into it. Which is what I did with the Bone Readers. With the Bone Readers, it was a kind of segmentation, if you like, of the society, in a relatively perpendicular way. It was a top-down look at society, or perhaps bottom-up look at society, and show how crime infuses that society, and not necessarily the kind of heinous, dramatic, shocking kind of crimes, but it's the kind of the liberties people take with each other, the way people march on, trample on other people's lives without caring. It's about a disposition. It's about a culture almost. And I found myself, and more, in fact, the next book, which the second in the series of that quartet of novels, I'm going to be looking at that even more closely. I have to try to be as modest as I possibly can with this. The truth is no. It surprised me and alarmed me. It just came so easily. Normally it would take me at least 3 years to write a novel. It took me 8 months to write that book. I literally wrote it flat out. But also because coming from a structural linguistic background, I have an approach to deconstructing narrative structure, and I teach it all the time. I teach. So even if I had never written anything along those lines before, all I needed to do was I read a lot about it. I didn't read the fiction. I read, kind of essays and commentaries on it. And then I went and I bought a couple, and I looked at the narrative structure, the understructure of it, and I did a graph of the understructure, and I just followed the understructure, just layering on my own personal stuff. But I do teach, and I've always been very interested in novella structure, the different kinds of novels there are, different architectures of novels. So I just followed that. I had it on my wall and I just followed it. I mean, a murder, yes, then complications, reverses, first plot point, second plot point, third plot point, reversal, you know what I mean? Just kind of, and I just followed it like that. And I was like literally watching it and just going along and inventing scenes as I go, I don't know. And it turned out to be a much more seriously received book than I thought it, was good. In fact, it surprised me completely. I just thought it was a kind of caper almost. And that's one version of it. And I began it. I wasn't very sure. I sent it to Jeremy at People 3% and said, Jeremy, this could be a short story or a novel or something for young people or whatever it is. And he just said, no way. This is a book you've got here. And, I'm really interested to see what you do with it. So I persevered, and in 8 months it was done, the manuscript. Yeah, I do. I don't know about other writers, and I don't have the same reservations about the conflation of or seeing the inseparability of the political with the cultural with the psychological. I don't make those distinctions. I don't make them because I think they're at the risk of offending people. I think they're artificial. I think they're false. I think it's a con, to be honest with you. I think that politics or the political in writing is made to be, responded to as something quite, inept or nasty or whatever it is, largely because I think the class of people, those of us who generally appreciate literature and text, feel quite uncomfortable or even threatened by that, by a literature that challenges our worldview and our core values, and that makes some kind of assertions. I know I'm talking in a kind of generic sense, and I'm not necessarily pointing my finger at people, but good literature is almost always about the dynamics of power at the level of relationships. The Bronte sisters is all about relationships. It's about power. It's also, when I read Thomas Hardy, for example, Dickens is obvious, Charles Dickens. That was even making serious social statements. So was even our Thomas Hardy. When I read Hardy in a way was not very happy about the mechanization, for example, of the English countryside. And we can see there, you name it. The literature that lasts and that stays with us is a literature that, in fact, asks very hard questions about the politics of our lives, of relationships, be it with power structures or be it with each other. And I'm not even sure I have answered the question. I'm addressing it, but what I'm getting at here is that for me, I don't see any distinction between them. I do upset people, which is good. In the 1980s, me along with another writer, was banned from appearing in making any public appearance, any public building or publicly owned space, building or space in Grenada in the 1980s because of my short stories and my political outlook. That changed dramatically since. But I've always been seen as a writer who write about about that sort of stuff. I was surprised, but then, not surprised. I was taken aback when I first saw that. And then, of course, I began to do the usual thing of looking around at the different kinds of prizes that there were out there. And almost all of them were by nature, or by presentation, prizes which focus on particular groups or segments. I look at, the Cain Prize of Africans, the women's prizes, whatever, yeah? But it's interesting. I think there's a particular sensitivity about race, which doesn't, you don't have the same sort of excitement, if you like, or objection, or a sense almost of vulnerability from the people who one least expect to feel vulnerable. You don't have that in other areas, but when the whole racial thing gets invoked, you do get quite often very strong, almost irrational responses from people like that MP that you're talking about there. So I understood all of that. On the one hand, though, it was a good thing because the publisher said they experienced a spike in sales in the book as a result of this MP challenging it, you know. But I was tempted to want to meet him and have a public debate about it with him. Yeah, I have to say, yeah. But I really, you know, I felt. But then that's me, how I react. I felt, hang on a minute, you know. And then I researched him and discovered that, well, I've heard him get called lots of things, include the very English word twat, which I didn't know existed before until I heard it from somebody who heard his name and said to me, "You mean, oh, that twat?" I said, "What's the twat?" You know. So I actually learned from the experience of researching the guy. Anyway.